Number here in the Exchange is 1-800-892-6477. And today in the Exchange, we're talking with Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul. He's a Texas congressman, a one-time libertarian candidate for president back in 1988. He's also a medical doctor, the father of 5, grandfather of 17. 1-800-892-6477 is our number. If you want to ask Congressman Paul about the issues or about his campaign for president, please join us, 1-800-892-6477. Congressman Paul, I do want to ask you about foreign policy because your positions have gained you lots of attention in this area. You've long advocated a very limited foreign policy role for the United States. And at a South Carolina debate in May, you talked about U.S. policy in the Middle East, basically saying we're in trouble in the Middle East. We were attacked because we've been causing trouble in the Middle East.
Certainly.
Could you tell us exactly what you said at that
my
debate?
My word was a major contributing factor, and I sincerely believe that. And it isn't my thoughts that came out of the blue. It's reading and studying what our CIA has reported and looking at history. And it shows that most often our messing around and meddling in the affairs of other countries have unintended consequences. Sometimes just over in those countries that we mess with, we might support one faction and it doesn't work and it's used against us. But there's the blowback effect that the CIA talks about, that it comes back to haunt us later on. For instance, a good example of this is what happened in 1953 when our government overthrew the Mossadegh government and we installed the Shah.
In Iran.
Well, in Iran. And for 25 years, we had an authoritarian friend over there, and the people hated him. They finally overthrew him, and they've resented it ever since. And that had a lot to do with the taking of the hostages in 1979. And for us to ignore that is to ignore history and ignore causes. It wasn't just because they hated Americans that they captured the hostages. It was because they were angry at us. Also, we have antagonized the Iranians by supporting Saddam Hussein, encouraging him to invade Iran. Why wouldn't they be angry at us? But the on-again, off-again thing is what bothers me the most. First, we're an ally with Osama bin Laden, then he's our arch enemy.
Wait, were we an ally with Osama bin Laden?
Yeah, when we were fighting the war in Afghanistan. He was the ally because, in matter of fact, our CIA set up the madrasa schools and paid money to train radical Islamists in Saudi Arabia to fight communism. They said, well, this will combat communism. But yes, the communists left, they failed, they're gone, but now they've turned on us. So it turns back on us. And that's what we have to realize. Muslims and Arabs have long memories. Americans, unfortunately, have very short memories, and they don't remember our foreign policy that may have antagonized. That's why the founders were absolutely right. Stay out of the internal affairs of foreign nations, mind our own business, bring our troops home, and have a strong defense. I think our defense is weaker now than ever. They say our reserve units their equipment is in 90% disarray and disrepair, and they're scattered all around the world. We're taking border guards and sending them to Iraq to train border guards over there. At the same time, the immigration issue is such a big issue. It's the orientation of our foreign policy that needs changed, and we should have a strong military. That's one of the responsibilities of our federal government. But I see our military defense going down, our borders not being protected, and we're wasting all this money. And the conservatives who advocate this position never ask themselves, how are we going to pay for this? So we borrow it. We can't even fight this war without borrowing money from China.
Let me ask you exactly about that quote, and I have it now in front of me. This is May 15th, the Republican debate in South Carolina, and I'm quoting here. They attack us because we've been over there. We've been bombing Iraq for 10 years. We've been in the Middle East for years. I think Reagan was right. We don't understand the irrationality of Middle Eastern politics. And after you finish this answer, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, jumped on you and said, are you, Congressman Paul, implying that the United States is to blame for the attacks of September 11th?
Well, he's demagoguing in the issue. Foreign policy is very, very important, and it has an influence, and it's a motivation. But what he's implying is that I lack patriotism, that I'm anti-American, that I'm blaming the victims, that the people who were killed were responsible. It's sort of like if somebody gets murdered, you look for the motive. of why somebody's murdered, and they say, nobody says, well, we're blaming the person that was murdered. And that's what he's implying, that I'm blaming victims. It's ridiculous. And what I'm saying is that foreign policy is part of the reason that motivates people to commit suicide terrorism. It's very, very important. There's been a lot of work done on this. And the person I cite is the individual, Michael Schur, that headed the Osama bin Laden unit for the CIA, I think for 15 years or some prolonged period. And his whole job was to understand the thought processes of Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda. So he agrees with me entirely. And that's why I said, don't you ever read about this? You know, there's a lot of information out there. There's no reason. This isn't strange. It isn't that I created this notion. It's a very well thought out position by our CIA.
The idea that American foreign policy inspires
and that there's blowback and we suffer consequences because of it. But that's not to blame the American people. It's to blame policy, bad policy that can go badly for us and backfire on us. That's quite a bit different.
Congressman Paul, lots of questions from our audience. Again, the exchange number 1-800-892-6477. Republican presidential candidate Ron Paul is in our studios this morning, getting ready for the Republican debate tonight at St. Anselm College. You can chime in 1-800-892-6477. To Henniker first, Rick is on the air. Welcome, Rick. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Thank you very much for being on the program, and thank you, Congressman Paul, for upholding the Constitution, being one of the few congressmen who continually do that, try to re-educate people who shouldn't need to be re-educated. My question has to do with the exclusive ability of the executive branch to get us into these things by way of the National Security Act of 1947, whose architect was a paranoid schizophrenic by the name of James Forrestal, threw himself out of a window at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Could you comment on that? And also on the Woodrow Wilson administration 17th Amendment? Thank you.
All right, Rick, thanks a lot. Congressman Paul, meaty questions there.
Right. The executive branch of government has taken upon themselves since World War II to enter into wars, not only on their own, but they've justified it with international law. The first one was Korea. We went in to enforce UN resolutions, even going into Iraq. When the authority was transferred to the president did it to enforce UN resolution. That is the loss of sovereignty, and that's what we have to address. I believe in the sovereignty of this country. I believe that the people, through their Congress, are the only ones that can declare war. And the debates that are going on now and what we should have done and what we could do and all the ands, ifs, and buts in the debate before should have all occurred before the debate. You know, it should have occurred before we went to war. We're having the debate 4 years too late. This is the responsibility of the Congress that we should have done before. So he is correct. Since World War II, it's not been good for us and the people. I think he say the 17th Amendment, the 17th, which allows senators to be elected, by general election rather than by states. Yes, that was sort of further undermining of the state's position. The two senators were elected originally to represent the state's position because we thought of the states as sovereign states, close to being a country in itself, and it was to be they were to be the two that would protect the states. I think that was a bad mistake. I think the odds of us reversing that are slim to none, but I think it's very symbolic of the loss of the republic and the de-emphasis of the importance of the states.